Hey everybody, it's Caleb here, and thank you for joining me. At any point in time, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel if you like what I'm talking about here. I wanted to just take a few minutes here to talk about something that's been going on in not just for the American military, but the American people and the world in general. And that's been the you're starting to see a movement towards a possible end of the Ukraine and Russian war. Um, Last week, President Trump met with President Putin in Alaska at now it's a joint Army Air Force base, and not a lot really came from that other than the fact that there was a conversation that needed to take place last I guess it was earlier this year, where President Zelensky had come to the White House, and Trump basically threw him out after a period of time. Today, Zelensky and other world leaders from the Western countries, they came to the White House. Seems to be a forward, congenial meeting that took place on the heels of what happened with Putin in Alaska. And one of the things that's very important with this to understand is that, as you can see behind me is the Operation Iraqi Freedom flag. I was in Iraq it was part of the surge, and then the campaign Iraqi Sovereignty right after the surge. And if you're a GWAT veteran, you've sacrificed a hell of a lot for this country, in not just deployments, but the toll after the deployments. And I know a lot of veterans are supporters of President Trump. Now, there's, I'm sure, a large number who are not, and that would be expected. But there's one thing that no one really wants is another quote-unquote forever war. We're tired of war. There's no doubt about that. Sadly, war is an extremely integral part of the human condition. War is always going to exist. I think the biggest thing is, especially with Iraq and Afghanistan as a backdrop for context, we don't want to see especially the possibility of America ever getting tied into something that's going on in Russia and Ukraine where there's no clear objective. And I think that was one of the big things that really drew down the support for what took place in the GWAT conflicts, which really and truthfully is never going to end, to be completely honest with you. And I could talk about that in a later video when it comes to Islamic terrorists and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a holy war that's a holy war that for whatever reason we're refusing to acknowledge as such. But with Ukraine and Russia, on the Russian end of it, just for some context, Putin, I honestly think Putin sees himself more as 16th century, 17th century, maybe even the 15th century czar, something of that nature, more so than Soviet communist commissar. That's my personal opinion of where Putin sees himself. So he looks past the modern scope of what we understand Russia to be in the backdrop of the context of the Soviet Union. So he looks at a place like Ukraine as more just sovereign, and those other European countries that broke away years and years ago after the fall of the Soviet Union. But he sees that just more of, sovereign Soviet land. And I know that's one of the big things that he's pushing for if there's going to be some sort of a deal to be made. On an individual basis, whenever it comes to my thoughts on the conflict in Ukraine, I am not opposed at all to arming Ukraine. So I know I'm kind of in a minority within my particular sphere of political and social influence and group within the veteran community. Um, I don't want to see a single American soldier fighting in Ukraine. Once that takes place, and if you watch a lot of and I've only seen a few little small clips of the American news media, especially if you're on the political left, of that leaning and that mindset. They were basically, after the meeting today in the White House, basically calling for, at least there was this one particular female anchor on one of the channels, basically calling for all European nations to put people on the ground, soldiers on the ground. Once that takes place, all bets are off. Then you're looking at a legitimate large-scale World War III. Got an ad popped up on my phone, and we don't want that. None of us want that, especially if you were part of Iraq or Afghanistan. And so I think the big reason for the countries today that came along with Zelensky is basically for security measures, and that's one of the things. And I agree with that. The Ukrainian people, they need some level of security measures because they're never going to be a part of NATO. NATO, you have to have, I think, one country separating from the Soviet Union and other hostile countries to be a part of NATO. Putin, from a strategic standpoint, understands that, and that's one reason why I think he invaded Ukraine, even going back to 2014 with the Crimea Peninsula, is he understands that dynamic of you got to have one country removed for NATO. And I've always looked at Ukraine as basically a sacrificial lamb in this particular conversation, because if you attack one NATO country, you attack all of them, basically. And then you're in a much larger conflict. And a lot of the Western countries, primarily over there, but also with us, it's like you're kind of caught between, well, what do you, because you want to help Ukraine because you can see them as a sovereign people. No one here, I would not, regardless of what kind of political differences I might have with the local government in, say, California, I don't want to see California annexed under no way, shape, or form by any other country, right? That's American soil, regardless of whatever your political agreements or disagreements might be. No one really in Ukraine really wants to see any part of their country, regardless of where it's located at, on either end, annexed and taken over by another country through military means or anything else. The sad reality is that's basically what's going to take place. I don't like that, but it's most likely what's going to take place because Putin is definitely not going to just say, oh, well, my bad, we'll retreat and we'll go back to the way it was before I invaded. He's not going to do that. Another aspect of this, and the larger scale of it, is whenever it comes to timeline about fighting this particular war out, Russia has a very, and I'm sure there might be someone who watches this and has a much broader understanding of the Russian mindset and culture. And if you do, please put it in the comments. But my understanding is you go back through history, there's several different conflicts where the Russian people would suffer monumental casualties, and it didn't matter. They were just not going to stop. It's something part of their particular culture to where they can withstand just large-scale casualties where other countries are not willing to go that far. Ukraine doesn't have the manpower to handle that. You're starting to see Zelensky, basically conscript 50, 60-year-old men. I'm 48 years of age, and, I can understand, I've been out of the Army now for 12 years. I can understand that if you've never been in the military at 40-something, 50-something years old, how hard that would be to go to the front line somewhere and fight, right? So in that regard, Putin's got a lot of play left that Zelensky just doesn't have. And again, I know I'm in kind of a minority. I don't mind funding Ukraine. We have plenty of issues here we got to take care of. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to get here and litigate those particular concerns. But from the American perspective, we have to look at this as, where do we want this conflict to go? Okay, because I can promise you, like I said, the flag in the back represents something we don't want to see again. And that still could very well flare up with a lot of the issues going on with the Taliban, Osama bin Laden, who's, Al-Qaeda, all those terrorist groups are still active. ISIS. So we know we might end up back in Iraq or Afghanistan, Syria, and we can find ourselves back in there literally next week, depending on certain things taking place. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But again, from a veteran standpoint, we don't want to see us involved. We don't. We don't want to see that. But we have to be realistic in those issues. And if we do find ourselves into a situation, regardless if it's in the Middle East again or somewhere in Europe, if you're going to commit yourself, you got to commit totally. You can't put one foot in and one foot out. You got to put both feet in. But again, a lot of that is for a later conversation. But I did just want to take a few minutes just talking about this issue with Russia and Ukraine. If you've watched this whole thing, put what your thoughts are in the comments. And let me also know if you want to see more of this or more of the fitness stuff, because I'm still working out some of the fitness videos, trying to get that worked out just right to put on the channel. But regardless if it's long form, shorts videos for the individual, just, curls or whatever. But this channel's got two primary purposes: it's fitness and then current event stuff. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. And tell me in the comments, especially if you've stuck around and think what you think about it. Again, consider liking, subscribing, all that kind of good stuff. And I will see y'all later. Bye-bye.